It's time to be woke. Take off your shades. It helps see through the smoke. Cause the wicked hide behind the cloak. And if you stay in the mist, you gon' be soaked. So listen up, cause this hair of the dog. What's real, what ain't? Is this the fog or smog? Cause there's a difference when you breathe it in. So don't let the corporate media take you for a spin. This that morning show, they put you in the know. So I hope that you ready, cause all we do is go, go, go. Yeah, come get your info, you gon' be like, whoa. Hair of the dog, we bout that, ayy. We in the zone, we out here, yeah. Speeding the facts.
Check. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Hair of the Dog. I'm Andy Kennedy. It is a fine Friday morning. And that isn't a reference to the weather. It's just because it's frickin' Friday. And welcome. Thank you for tuning in this morning. We have got a kind of a wild card show today. I think it's going to be a little bit of information, a lot of silliness. And this is my prediction for this show. And that will start with my lovely and talented co-host, Miss Carrie Barber. Good morning, Carrie.
Hey, good morning. Good morning to everybody. And yeah, I this particular program is completely and utterly my fault today. This is truly a fucking Friday. So, yeah, I had some house guests here all week. Barely managed to get my homework done during the week. And as of today, yeah, completely ran out of steam. But this particular topic today is, as I was scrolling through media headlines when I had to leave, my own little cocoon of happiness to go out into the world and figure out what the hell is going on, and it's just a shit show. What I noticed was all of the headlines and all of the writing and, some of these editors, the way that they wrote these stories and opinions, and it just, to me, it was like, oh boy, the neoliberals are out there in full force trying to manipulate events. So I wanted to go through some of those. But yeah, this is much more informal than what we normally do. And that is completely and utterly my fault. So thank you for putting up with it this morning. And thank you. We already have a lot of people joining this morning. So good on you. Thank you. Arif is joining us from Liberia. Good evening to you. And then Diane M16, I'm butchering that. Good morning, comrades. Thank you. So if you're just tuning in and you're seeing our show for the first time, we are completely live and interactive. We want you to be part of the conversation. And particularly today, I want to hear your opinions, your examples, and your thoughts on some of the things we're going to talk about. So type it in the chat. Andy will see it. I might see it, and we'll read them on air and invite you to join that conversation. So Andy, what's going on with you real quick?
Oh, I'm just kind of hanging in there. Deb and I have a rare weekend off in August. It was a little bit disappointing. Finally, the three of us, and when I say the three of us, I mean Deb and I and my mother, all have had our second vaccines, and enough time has gone by that we built up enough antibodies that we feel comfortable going to see Mom for the first time since all this started. And so I was really excited about that, but something came up unexpectedly, and so we can't go this weekend. So we're gonna have to wait a couple of weekends. So this is going to be a catch-up weekend of stuff that's we've basically gotten a little bit behind on in terms of stuff around the house and my projects to do with us and with Real Progressives and Macro and Cheese and the new Untouchables, and just trying to slam a bunch of those things down before we get busy again starting next weekend. So a little bit of everything. And so I'm looking forward to at least some point putting my feet up a little and just kind of relaxing. So looking forward to that.
Nice. Yeah, none of that is happening here. We're actually getting ready we're getting ready to kick off our program. So something really cool happened with our little production company. We added headcount. So we have a new person who started, and that was part of what I was working on this week, getting them trained up and explaining what all is going on. And so one of the big projects, we're not just out here as podcasters, journalists covering the stories, we're actually trying to walk the talk. So we support a lot of community efforts, direct action, for example, Tour for the Poor, that Rome Bethia is doing, and a lot of other things. But one of the pieces that I am personally working on is a sustainability initiative in two folds, not just production of food for people in need, but also building materials, a low-cost, sustainable, high-value way of building, particularly in the wake of climate change and our housing crisis. So I'll have more information coming out about that, but that project is beginning to ramp up this week. And our new little person, and I say little just because name's Devin, and he is diminutive in size and knows it, and much younger. So he's introducing me to TikTok and all sorts of other things, like has these great bold ideas, and I'm like, go for it, just do whatever you want. But one of the other things he's introduced me to this week is woofers. I think it's WWOOFER. So if you know what this is, help me explain it, because apparently if you get into a woofer community and you host a project, whether it's organic or sustainable or whatever, there are people from all over the world who will come to your location, learn about it, volunteer, help you with it, and then move on. Like a group of happy locusts will descend on your location, help you with it, learn it, and take it back home. And it's almost like a global initiative to pass along sustainability information all over the world. So we're gonna become a woofer host site here. So if you're watching and this is your thing, come on out, and I will personally cook for you while showing you how to do this thing.
Yes,
so,
we will get them,
so
get
cool.
the munchies together and make lots of food. So by the way, Carrie, there's already been a couple of people that are implying that you are indeed high, and I'm not going to refute that. Sorry.
What? Oh, okay. All right. So, all right. Now we turn into confession caps. So here's the thing. So I had a friend come visit me from Chicago. She drove out here, and my friend is a world-class stoner. She's been high since forever. And I recently was prescribed cannabis for a bunch of disability things. And so I am new to this. It's only been like 2.5 years, but I'm one of those people that's incredibly sensitive to it. So for those of you in the chat who pick this up, good on you. So
I've heard that Kay arrived at your house with the intention of turning your travel trailer into New Mexico's first hot box.
And it was successfully done. So
kudos to Kay.
This is where, kudos to Kay. So we got up this morning at 5:30 because she had to drive back to Chicago. She's fine. Me, on the other hand, I'm like, when does this wear off? Stop.
So basically, she got in her car and she's flying back to Chicago.
Yeah, she is. She's on her way to Wichita right now. So good luck, Wichita. But, yeah. So my apologies. I have always been a cheap date, and so I'm struggling this morning, but I appreciate all of you who saw it right away and called it out. So
so I want to do just a little sidebar here, just because of the story that you said before, our audience exposed you for the lush that you are. But
Yes.
when you were introducing our new team member, Devin, before we started recording, you said that their pronouns are they, them, right? And you were indicating to me how hard a time you were having with that because you weren't used to it. And when you were doing this introduction here live, you referred to Devin as he and him through the entire part of it, right? And so I think that I just wanted to bring that up because there's a real bridge that people our age group have to try to cross. And because it's a very new concept for a lot of us, if people don't know, I'm 55. Carrie, you're in your 40s. I think you're in your mid 40s or something, or early 40s.
I'm winking at 50.
All right. So
I'll be there
anyways,
soon,
we're close enough that this can be a problem with our age group. You know, I've heard a lot of my friends that complain about that, right? That they say that, you know, it's binary. You're either a male or female. And, you know, obviously if you're in this space as a progressive and you're an advocate, an ally, you understand that people have the right to self-determination, right? And of course, they can be referred to or asked to be referred to in any way that they want, right? And so that's a very important thing. But the problem is with any group, Gen X and older, you're always going to run into some pushback on that, depending on the quote unquote wokeness, maybe of the person that's speaking, right? And as an ally, I want to give everybody as much, you know, of their own determination as I possibly can. And that's not just in terms of sexuality or sexual orientation, you know, or how they identify. That's also race and sex and every determination that is out there. It is muscle memory, though, and it's certainly, you do, if you practice it, you do start to get used to it, and it becomes a lot easier to do over time. And one way that I was initiated into thinking in this way was a trial by fire, where there's a music event that I used to, well, up until 2 years ago when everything shut down, but for a number of years volunteered for. And I was working quite closely with this one individual that identified, that was born a woman, and she was a woman. And her name was Jax. Well, Jax had a sex change, had the operation, and you know, through the process, now identifies as male, right? So someone that you've identified year after year after year as female, that's now male, you know, you really got to be on your toes in those interactions. And I know that people, if they understand that you're a friend and that you're trying to, I know they give you some leeway. But it was a real good way for me to learn it, because I was involved with someone on a personal level that did that. And so I tried to keep it in my mind constantly with the interactions. And now it feels a lot more natural to me. It's just a matter of getting used to it, is really the point that I'm making. So if you're our age group, it's good to allow people to identify themselves, but give yourself a little leeway, because it's a very new concept for you. But if you can keep it in your mind, you can learn to do it, and then it becomes rather easy after a while. That's my soapbox.
No, and I get it. And I think in this particular space where I know Devin pretty well and he knows me, I'm just gonna default to one of my favorites, is instead of, you know, they, them, y'all. There you go. There's your plural, because I could use it for everything. Everybody's happy. So I appreciate. And what I need to do is, Devin's a little bit of an introvert. So I want to see if we can get Devin on, because not only is he
They.
they not only are they funny and engaging and so completely hip, but just full of some great ideas and enthusiasm, and an advocate for the geriatrics that like me. So
And
that,
actually familiar with TikTok.
yeah. Yes. So we'll see if we can get him on so we can introduce him and talk about why he's here, some of the stuff he's going to be working on. And I'm really excited because he's just got so many ideas. So there's not only the
I'm going to give you some leeway,
doing, but
I'm going to give you a little bit of leeway right now, just because of your mental state. But when you sober up, we're going to practice. Okay.
Okay, we're going to practice.
Okay.
That'll be good. That'll be good. Yeah. Bear with me, y'all. So all right, so this is actually really good segue for language and why words matter. And I remember as a kid when I was studying, and we all go through that, what do I want to be when I grow up, and I looked at where is the influence. You've got influence and power, and I was like, yeah, I think the influence is really in the written and spoken word. So I was looking at what I wanted to do in that particular space as a career, and just kind of leaned into journalism because I have always had a crusade mentality about it's not hard to have high morals and stick to them and really focus on that. So journalism was kind of a natural thing. I went into the corporate space, all of that. So this is where words really matter. So when we're talking about transgender or any of these other spaces where you want to recognize and honor the person in who they are, words matter. In journalism, words matter big time because journalists, well, let's say this, propagandists and marketing people under the guise of a journalist can really sway an entire population. And if you don't believe that, let's go back to the Gulf Wars, right? The 1 and 2 under Bush. All of us, I think, were in some way, shape, or form caught up in what that was and what we were seeing on news media. Some of you obviously were never hoodwinked like the rest of us were, but the words and the people who were using those words led us to war, and millions have died. That's power. The influence of the language prompted all of us in some way, shape, or form to participate in something that now, looking back, hindsight being what it is and knowing what we know, was a horrific incident. And so when I was going through the headlines and looking at some of the work that was published, I noticed this quite a bit. The theme kept coming up over and over again, the words that these editors were using to influence the way that people think really matters. And I know our audience is totally savvy, up on everything, but we got to remember that even in our space, progressivism, we're tiny. We're tiny compared to what is actually happening in the real world with our neighbors and community and whatever else. They are very susceptible to what's happening on MSNBC, on CNN, and things like that. So I pulled out a couple of headlines that I wanted to explore this idea, get some feedback from our audience, and see where you sit with it. So one of the first ones that I wanted to cover is CNN put something out, and I posted a link to it if you haven't read it. But there was one quote in it that the CNN analyst, his name is Chris Cillizza, Cillizza, editor at large for CNN. He's been on MSNBC and he's been doing a whole lot of stuff. Plus, he's got his own program. And to me, what he wrote and what he chose to focus on very much is an example of a neoliberal mindset that I think we all need to be aware of. Wherever you fall in the political space, pay attention to these things. So he was writing about Representative Cori Bush. And the first thing I noticed when he was writing about Cori Bush, he mentioned Cori Bush as a representative once, and then the rest of the article was about Cori. Like he's got some familiarity with her that he obviously should not have, and not as an editor, not as a journalist. And by using somebody's first name in that capacity, you diminish their role. And so that was the first thing I noticed about what he wrote. But when he was talking about her organizing on the Capitol steps, a protest, kind of a sit-in protest about the rent moratoriums ending, what he chose to focus on was something else. And on his headline, he actually calls out Representative Bush as she's the reason that Democrats are going to win or lose in the midterm. And I was like, well, that's a bold statement, right? So I read the article to figure out why he was already pinning midterm losses off of Cori Bush advocating for people who are about to be evicted. And it was this quote. So I'm going to read it to you, so bear with me. But the quote that he highlighted was from Representative Bush, and she said, I'm going to make sure that and this is in terms, sorry, of security and defunding the police. So the question was posed to her about defunding the police and her own security entourage that she had with her. She said, I'm going to make sure I have security because I know I have had attempts on my life and I have too much work to do here. Too many people that need help right now for me to allow that. So if I end up spending $200,000, if I spend $10 more on it, you know what? I get to be here to do the work. So suck it up, and defunding the police has to happen. We need to defund the police to put that money into social safety nets. So the quote, whether you believe it's reasonable or not, this particular editor at large, Chris Kaliza, decided to focus on that last part. He was pointing out what he perceived as the hypocrisy of Representative Bush hiring a private firm for her own personal security while advocating for defund the police. Now, when you sit with that for just a moment and consider, well, she has had threats on her life. Capitol security, pardon me, Capitol Police and the security don't necessarily protect the individual person, and they only do it in a small space. That's when you come to work and you get into the office. But here, this editor seems to be suggesting that because all of that happened doesn't matter, threats on her life doesn't matter, the fact that she does not have personal protection and security any other time of the day, at home, in between the commute, all of this, none of that really matters. The fact that she is advocating for defund the police means that she therefore deserves no security of her person whatsoever. So I wanted to see if you agreed with that, because I thought that these two things are not the same. So if you've ever had a personal security detail, most of us don't. We don't have the need for it, nor can we afford it. The activity and the work that those professionals do is night and day compared to general security in an office space, even at the Capitol. So for this particular,
I
go
have,
ahead, Andy.
I'm sorry for interrupting, Carrie, but like, I mean, those two concepts are at odds with one another to just on their face, right? Because, you know, as a Black woman, Cori Bush, you know, in the system of military style policing and systemic racism, doesn't necessarily feel like the police have her back, right? Like, I mean, doesn't that make sense that the logical step is, if you don't feel safe, especially if you went through January 6th, whether you agree that the reason for that, or if people were actually in danger, if she feels like she is and doesn't necessarily trust the police to protect her, then what's a congresswoman going to do, right?
Yeah, so in my own personal story, I was working on 2 years ago the ETO story out of Chicago, which which to me, it is my personal belief, it is still the largest cover-up in Illinois state history. 326 people dead by poisoning of a company that is still getting tax breaks on the Illinois taxpayers' backs, right? So I did a 3-part story on it, and that's where I earned my last death threat. And I had to go to another news organization. I was going to be on Hard Lens Media with Kit Cabello and Dan Lupiker to talk about this story. And it was known, it was well publicized. So I actually did call a security firm to escort me to the studio and make sure that when I left the studio, I was okay. It was not cheap, but it was something that I felt I needed to have, because what was I supposed to do? Call Chicago police and say, hey, I'm worried about my person. And their obvious question is, has a crime happened? No. Then why are you calling us? Right? So the differences in police security, Capitol security, they are there during or after a crime, right? Like just like bank security. They're there to intimidate, maybe get you to think twice about robbing the bank, but yeah, they can't actually prevent a robbery. Whereas personal security, absolutely they can. That's what they do. So this particular firm scoped out the train stop that I was getting off, made sure that anybody who was there was supposed to be there. Anybody who approached me, they approached them first. That's the nature of security. And if Cori Bush wants to spend money on that, that's her choice. But this editor instead went with the Jim Clyburn narrative that defund the police is too confusing, rather than leaning into his own job and explaining what defund the police means. Means we don't want our police officers who are out there for a specific purpose. We don't want them doing mental health. We don't want them doing all of these things that they are not qualified or trained for. And oh, by the way, we want to protect our officers by making sure that we don't put them in a situation they're not qualified to handle. Duh, that's not hard to explain. But instead, this editor chose to talk about Cori Bush and what a hypocrite she is. And to me, that's irresponsible journalism, right? Everybody's entitled to an opinion. But when you write for CNN and you are an analyst for CNN and you have your own space on CNN for your own program and you write those kind of words, what is it exactly you're trying to do? So I know that some people feel some type of way about Cori Bush on policy, which is totally fair, but replace Cori Bush with anyone else. And I think the facts of this particular editorial stand, it's irresponsible. And this to me was yet more of the drumbeat towards what they are already anticipating and in some cases want. We know that when Democrats control all 3 branches or have influence in all 3 branches, they want to lose the midterms. And I say that in terms of what they do. They may say that we want to retain control, but then they do absolutely everything they can to make sure, they don't necessarily help people. They don't enact popular policy. They say some really shitty things, Pelosi, on national TV.
Well, the
Right.
government
So
is
they do
acting
everything they
exactly the
possibly
way
can.
it should, right? The government is acting exactly the way that we expect it to. Why do I say that? Because they're representing the people that have put them in office. But that's not talking about the normal everyday person. That's talking about the oligarchs class, right? They're the ones that buy the politicians and make it possible for them to get funding to run campaigns so that they can go to office. So this system is working the way it is because those are the inherent flaws, but that's the way the system is supposed to be, right? With Citizens United decision that allowed large corporations and rich people to fund elections has, turned the tables and, alienated a shit ton of citizens, especially in the United States, who now say, what's the point, right? That's where we are now.
Right, when they want to drive down voter turnout. So real quick, Aspen, good morning, Aspen Fallen. Thank you so much. And Aspen agrees with me, which means I love you even more. Thank you, Aspen. And then
Carrie is filled with love this morning.
Something. Okay, and I just love this screen name. A dingo ate me baby. Says stop transfer of military equipment to police and give it to the houses. Change would come quickly. Well, even if we just go with the first part, maybe our police force don't need to be militarized. That's not, you remember, okay, so here's where my age comes in again. Remember the community police officer, Officer Roberts, who's whistling along as he's walking down the street and talking to all the neighbors, and everybody knows who he is. And it was great. You could trust a police officer. That was in my lifetime. I was a kid. Now, no. Do you have a warrant? If you don't, you need to leave. Get your foot off my threshold. Get out. And that is the change that we've had. So I agree with you. Dingo ate my baby. I appreciate that. And then Don Hooligan is actually doing a really nice commentary on sustainability. So I think you're really going to like the project that we're going to unveil coming up. And yeah, so keep it up. So, and Misanthropic, good morning to you. Oh, hey, we get Jay Buffon with us. Whoa, celebrity sighting. Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, JB.
Yeah, that's awesome. Awesome. So, so this was an example that I wanted to pull out with CNN, because CNN had a couple different headlines that were very similar to this, that it's all the progressives' fault already that the Democrats have lost the midterms. So,
And Russia.
All right. And Russia. Yes. Yeah.
There was a point that I wanted to make when you were introduced this segment, Carrie, about the Iraq War and the lies that got America involved in that. And I think it was a very maybe subtle, but certainly a very definable turning point in the way information is disseminated in this country. And the reason I say that is because there are always repercussions for what you say, right? Positive or negative, but people have, especially now when everything is videoed or recorded or whatever, right? There is always repercussions. And I think a lot of the time before the Iraq War or the series of events that led America to the Iraq War, there was always a mind of pundits in whatever space they were in, if they were going to try to deceive or spin something, right? There was always a mind of what I was going to do and how that was going to come back and bite me in the ass if it was wrong, right? So there was always, contingency plans or plan B or whatever you want to call it. People kept that in mind. I think in terms of American politics, when Donald Rumsfeld and George W. Decided that they were going to out and out lie to the American people about weapons of mass destruction, that was one of the first times that a lie of that magnitude could easily, once the war started, be turned on its ear and people would know the truth, right? And so it wasn't that they were concerned with the fallout of that. They were just going to lie in plain sight and they were just going to do it, right? It didn't matter because we were there. We got the results that we wanted and it's all good for them, right? So I think a lot of the things that we're seeing now where the reporter that reported, about Cori Bush in this narrative, I don't care if you can say that it's incorrect. I'm going to say it anyway because an accusation is as good as the facts, right? And in this society where we live, where you've got a 2-minute window of people's attention, right? The old saying that the accusations on page 1, the retractions on page 37, that is definitely a thing, because they just don't retract anymore, right? So I think that was a real turning point in the way that the media dealt with things, and the way the politicians weren't concerned with the fallout anymore. I just wanted to make that point.
So I don't know if you got this in Canada, what was happening here, but there was a second part of that. There was the cudgel. So not only were they unabashedly saying whatever they wanted to say, but on the back end here, they came down on you like a ton of bricks. If you even questioned just a little bit, you were not a patriot. You were not supporting the troops. You hate our troops. You hate our service members. And that it was just over and over again, unrelenting. And you couldn't even get a thought in, let alone speak it, without all of this coming down that you need to be a patriot, you need to support the troops. And I remember trying to make the case, like, I support the troops. This is economic conscription that put them there. And we are, particularly, when it comes to the executive branch in the White House, the ultimate responsibility is you are the gatekeeper and the protection for our troops. You are never to send them into harm's way without righteousness. Not just it's the right thing to do, but righteousness. And that is the only time that you will risk our sons and daughters, moms and dads. And that wasn't happening.
Right.
That wasn't happening. There was human capital. But so it was this other piece of it, which you're going to start to see progressive people. And this is why I call out the CNN article on Cori Bust, because they are already saying that you progressives, how dare you in your audacity wanting to live and have healthcare and a fair pay? How dare you? You cost the Democrats a midterm election that hasn't even happened yet. And this is why I wanted to point out the words of this editor, because here it is. It's this slow rolling drumbeat that is coming out now. So pay attention to those words. Yeah, you're right, Andy. It's they don't give a shit. They don't. So
a lot of the media, in terms of spin, right, and how around that time, a lot of the smaller mom and pop radio and television stations were getting bought out by huge corporations in order to control the narrative, right? So a lot of those things were happening as well, right? It's easier for us to accuse you if you don't ever get to hear the facts or the truth, right? That's a huge part of this as well.
Yeah, exactly. So in tandem with us, slightly out of the political space, there was another example that I thought really tied into how words matter. And I pulled this from Huffington Post. This was the story of an ICU doctor and what's going on now under the global pandemic. So if you're just tuning in, hey, we're still under a global pandemic and people are still dying. And our hospitals are now being overrun with the sick and the dying because words matter. So this is where I pulled this out. And I put the article to it, or I'm sorry, the link to this article so you could read it for yourself. But what caught my attention is this doctor says, I'm an ICU doctor, and I cannot believe the things unvaccinated patients are telling me. My experiences in the ICU this past week have left me surprised, disheartened, but most of all, angry. So there were 2 points that I wanted to pull out of this and present it to you for consideration. Is number one, the power of words. So when you go from, my generation, Andy's generation and older, we were taught to trust authority, that they had our best interests at heart. So you still have, some of you may know Tom Brokaw and all of these other talking heads who would get on the news at night and reassure the American public with truth and honesty. Even if they were reporting on something horrific, you had trust that there were people who were looking out for our best interest and would handle it, the best and brightest minds. And you had somebody like a Tom Brokaw giving it to you in a straight shot. So this is what we grew up with, kind of indoctrinated. So in today's present situation where none of that's happening, it's hard for us to hear the information from a glossy CNN perspective or a White House briefing and not still believe that our best interests are being looked out for, that us, the regular people, not just a small segment. So this is where have empathy with our brothers and sisters who are anti-vax, because they are so caught up in this. And then also for the rest of us who are trying to not kill other people and get vaccinated, we're still trying to get the information, because I want to bring him on when he gets back from a family trip. But this is our friend of the show who's a virologist. But one of the questions that I have had was, I remember when the vaccines came out and they were starting to roll them out, there was the caveat that you will need a booster on this, and it's probably going to be about 8 months from when you first get your full inoculation, your full battery, whether it's one vaccine or two. About 8 months later, you probably will need another one because the COVID virus is mutating so quickly. And then I never heard that again. And I'm still not hearing it, even though I know I'm going to need a booster because, Delta, and then the ones that are coming behind Delta, right? So I can still get COVID and I probably will survive it because I've had the vaccine, but the booster would be a huge benefit to me and everyone else around me. Even I'm not getting that information. So I'm trying to be empathetic with our anti-vax people. And I don't mean the people who cannot get the vaccine because they're immunocompromised and other things that are happening. I'm talking about the people who can get it and choose not to because they trusted somebody in a position of authority who told them that COVID is a hoax, that is no different than the flu, and nobody's really going to be affected. That really, do you know anybody who suffered and died? And then, oh, by the way, here are all the ingredients that are in it, and they sound scary, right? Or it's literally going to change your DNA and all of these things. So I'm trying to be empathetic to those people because on the opposite side of it, I'm waiting for the same information that I need to have to be safe. But what I thought was interesting with this doctor, here's somebody who has taken an oath to treat all people, and they're getting frustrated because they work with transplant patients. These are people who have been, if you're in the US, you've probably been on a waiting list for years, waiting for the transplant that you need to survive. These people are being affected. And she wrote about her experience trying to treat them who got COVID because they were trying to do the best they could, and they got COVID from other patients in the hospital, as well as a number of ICU patients who refused to get a vaccine and are now dying of COVID and regretting that decision and who they listened to and very angry about what they felt was being lied to. So here's where the power of words matter and the influence of it. So I would invite you to take a look at what the doctor said, because you can see the frustration that she had because so many of her colleagues have gotten ill and died. And oh, by the way, doctors and nurses don't get unlimited sick pay when they're out. Then I'd also, yeah, I'll
Don't
also
get me
call
started.
your attention to. Yeah, I know it's awful. But the number of politicians on the right who have gotten sick, the one politician, I don't recall his name at the moment, he was in the hospital for months battling COVID. And he gets out and still, nope, austerity for everyone else. And he was a representative from Texas. So I live in New Mexico and our ICUs are starting to fill up. We're going back to mass. We're going back to all of these protections. And there are two headlines that came out of New Mexico. One, our Delta came from Texas. Thank you, Texas vacationers. And then the other is this massive spread of Delta across the Midwest came from people traveling and vacationing from New Mexico. So words matter. So I'm going to throw this out to the chat. What do you think in terms of words and influence during the pandemic? Cori Bush one was easy. It was easy. I saw y'all just jump right all over it. Now do this one. Do words matter in this context when it's a global pandemic? And where do we go? So there was someone who called out, I don't know if it was Jimmy Dore or someone else, but the White House had talked about a couple weeks ago banning anybody from social media who is conveying misinformation. And they latched onto something that Joe Biden said during an interview where he said you could not get COVID if you had been vaccinated. And they let that stand. They didn't challenge it. And no, that's not true. You can absolutely get COVID again and again and again, whether you've been vaccinated or not. So do words matter in that context? If the president of the United States says it's the Wuhan virus and it's China and they're at fault, but don't worry about it, don't be a sheep, does that matter? Or if the president of the United States comes out and says, if you've had the vaccines, you cannot get COVID, don't worry about it, go back to work and school. Does that matter? Power words.
Yep. And
So,
got a quick little side story for you, Gary, that I think you'll find interesting in the land of healthcare that people, have heard about Canada. In Ontario, where I live, which is the province. If you're not familiar with Canada, province is like a state. And in province of Ontario, our provincial government is conservative, right? It's right-leaning. So they have their little right-leaning tendencies in the land of healthcare. And when they first came into power, they had their little push at trying to, oh, maybe we can privatize healthcare a little bit. No, forget it. It's not going to happen. As some of our viewers know, but maybe they don't, my wife is in the healthcare industry. She works in the OR as a scrub nurse in the local hospital. And she has not had very much time off at all since the very beginning of this. And they have basically worked their butts off in that hospital, trying to deal with all of this. So she has a very unique perspective because she gets to see it, right? And all the changes that have happened. And our Ontario government, some kind of Emergencies Act invoked it. And it basically suspended their labor contracts, right? Their ability to move around under seniority, right to refuse work, breaks and lunches, all of these things were suspended because of this act. They wanted to have the ability to move them around if they needed to, but they're, basically it's a legal way to remove their rights. And so we've been dealing with that over the last little while. Well, there was a push in the parliament to perhaps give the healthcare professionals, and especially the nurses, the RNs, RPNs, a raise in pay, an automatic raise in pay over this time period for all of the work they're doing and all of the danger that they've been in. And it basically failed. And instead, they're going to freeze their wages for the next 3 years, right? Because they're using the narrative of not having any money. And one of the members of parliament, our local conservative member of parliament in the Peterborough area where I live, voted yes to this wage freeze, right? So fast forward to last week, all of the nurses across the province of Ontario instead got a certificate with their name on it saying, thank you for your sacrifice from this guy. from this member of
A
parliament.
certificate?
The guy that denied them a raise over the next 3 years. Instead, they got a thank you. So a couple of the nurses in the Peterborough Hospital are bundling them all together and sending them back.
Thank you. Yes. Oh my, that is insulting. And he probably said, God, you imagine their handlers and the staffers going, oh, they'll really appreciate this hands. And they're not all hand signed. Hate to tell you, they're stamped and printed. And there you go. So as minimal effort as possible to put those together. There you go. But Andy, surely you can take that certificate and pay a mortgage with it or go on vacation, right?
Well, you could make an airplane.
Yeah, you could. I'm sorry that happened.
It's just typical,
So
right? It's in this this time that we live in, right? Who our government officials are actually thankful for. Let's say, and it's not you and I.
How thankful. Show me the money. Show me the money. And that's kind of where we're at with this. So
Absolutely.
Okay, so I just posted a poll in the chat on the Fred Hampton Leftists chat. I do really want to know what you think. So we knew that Orange Man bad, and everything they did to actually divide the country into have and have-nots. And Andy, you and I talked about it last year this time about how they were using it as a racial component, almost as quiet genocide, when they found out that it was affecting urban communities and Black men in particular at a higher rate. They went, oh, well, let's let it do its course, right? So, but now we've got the new administration, the kinder, gentler administration. Are they handling it well? And my personal thought is, well, I see the rest of the world at least leaning into helping out their small businesses and their populations. If the most important job for me is to protect my community till we get that herd immunity or enough people vaccinated, help me do that. Instead, we're sending kids back to school. Municipal workers are back, but they've got mask mandates. What are we doing here? What exactly is the goal? Is it just to keep the economy afloat and we should sacrifice ourselves for the economy? I'm unclear. So I want to know what you think. Do you think the current administration is handling this better? And this again is where words matter. Leadership is part of, here's the end goal and here's how we're going to achieve it. And I'm going to give you updates on each and every one of these things. I haven't really seen that too much. So weigh in there. And Andy, it's disheartening every time I hear from Canada what you guys are doing, because I always think you guys are the bright and shining light on the hill compared to the shit show that we go through, but you guys deal with it too. So,
of course we do.
Sorry.
That's just the way it is, right? The number one export in the United States over the last 5 decades has been neoliberalism, right? It's reared its ugly head pretty much in every country, even the ones that are socialist leaning in Europe and South America, right? It's the fight against it that has been more successful in some places than others, right? We see real problems with, not only in the US, but in the UK, Brazil, India. And isn't it funny that that's where the pandemic has been the worst? Oh, wonder why.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, okay. Gerardo is correcting me, and I appreciate it. Gerardo says, replace the word economy with the wealthy people's comforts, right? And that echoes what you tend to say, Andy, about the donor class. You cannot upset the donor class in any way, shape, or form, and that's kind of what's going on here. So,
well, and that's you're absolutely right. We have to remember that that the Democrats have always, and any party that has the word Democrat attached to it, has always been in service of the oligarchs, have always been in service of the ruling class since the beginning of time, right? Why should America expect that that would be any different? And you've heard me say several times on, especially on this show, that when we watch, from the Biden administration, from its beginning, what is really going to make a difference, right? Which is going to make real change as opposed to performative change, right? And that is there going to be policy change that actually cost the donor class money? And we still haven't seen it. And I'm guessing we're never going to until the Democrats lose control of the House and Senate in 2022, because they once again didn't do what they said they were going to do. And the circle of life continues.
We've got to break that circle. So, all right, before we get out of here, as we're talking about money and things like this, for those of you who don't know, Andy's a little famous, but he doesn't really talk about. Andy is the producer and really the whiz behind a fantastic podcast called Macro and Cheese. So when we're talking about words and the power of words and truth and honesty, one of the greatest lies of our entire lifetime is that the federal deficit is debt, and that we must adhere to a budget and not invest in our own people and infrastructure. Greatest lie ever told, in my opinion. Andy's podcast dispels all of that, and he does a phenomenal job. It's on iTunes and all of the other platforms. It's Macro and Cheese. So what's coming up on Macro and Cheese? I know that you have ramped up with the Untouchables again, that particular series. What can people look forward to on Saturday?
Well, we do have for people that don't know, that haven't seen or heard about it, Patrick Lovell and Eric Vaughn are the co-producers of the docuseries The Con, and we've been working closely with them to create the podcast, video and audio podcast, called The New Untouchables, the Pecora Files. And it is a very, very deep dive into the main causes of the 2008 great financial crisis. And so we decided to do a little bit of cross-pollination this week, where Steve has interviewed the two of them on our Macro and Cheese podcast in order to fill in some of the gaps, right? Because this is a huge story, and it's a very involved one. It's not necessarily complicated, but there are a lot of facts. And if you haven't seen the New Untouchables from the very, very beginning, you can be missing a lot of the pieces of the puzzle, and it can be very confusing. So this is kind of like the condensed version, the Reader's Digest version of what we've seen so far. And it's a good way to catch up if you're interested in seeing it. And again, that's the New Untouchables, the Pecora Files. We currently have published season 1, which is 5 episodes, and we're about halfway through season 2. And so there's 10 episodes total so far. And that is being produced by Real Progressives. And there's also a New Untouchables Facebook page, Twitter feed, Twitch feed, all of these places that you can see it. And it is shocking, to quite honestly, to find out the corruption and fraud that's currently baked in the system. And you get to hear facts like there were 16 million foreclosures by 2012 in the United States after the great financial crisis, affecting 40 million people. And the Federal Reserve backstopped the major banks to the tune of $47 trillion to allow these frauds to continue. That's $47 trillion. So when the government complains that their $25 trillion in debt. The banks have received that much money to backstop corruption. That can be quite a concept to get your head around, but it's all true.
It's shocking and horrifying. So 60 million would be a hell of a class action lawsuit. But what lawyer is going to go up against Department of Justice and all these other groups? So,
well, the problem is that
so
the Justice Department is all part of it, right? The banks have held the Justice Department hostage because they lend everybody money, right? It's a corruption that's been, and it's the third part of three parts. It's the Great Depression, 29, the savings and loan debacle, late 90s, early 2000s, and the Great Financial Crisis, 08. They're three parts of the same show. And it's amazing that all of those things happen because of banks and bank CEOs acting badly. It's really a hard concept to get your head around because it is so corrupt and so fraudulent, and it's making a lot of people scratching their heads and waking up to this. And we also just got some good news. It's going to be premiering on Amazon and iTunes, and I believe one other place, can't remember at the moment, but that'll be on September 21st, I believe. That's the docuseries.
Wonderful, congratulations. So we'll have to do a watch party for that. But
absolutely,
that's amazing. So please check that out. Coming out on Saturday. And then next week, we'll see if we can get our lovely new assistant on camera to talk about a couple things, as well as our little mini series on what we can do, because I don't want to focus on, oh God, we're all going to die all the time without providing, wait a second, there's something going on quietly at the local level that you need to know about. Not just the project we're working on, but all across this country. I see it. I get to weigh in on some of these projects where communities are coming together because they recognize what's going on, same as the rest of us. And I see it in the chat. You're all talking about it. We see what's happening. So, okay, we need to check out of that. And we're going to do something just a little bit different to make sure that our families and our community is okay. And I think that is where the silver lining on a lot of things are. Like when you look through the history books from the Tudors to the Kennedys and everything else, it's always on the rise and fall of that donor class. But they don't really talk about what is happening on the level that the rest of us are at. You know, the plebes, the paupers, the poors. We survive, and we do this by coming together in community. So that's the story I want to bring to you next week, something a little happier, and make sure that that you have the information, you can make an informed decision. And if some of these solutions that we're offering, some of the information that comes out of it is applicable and appropriate for you, you can consider it. Because I'm literally sitting in a situation right now where I'm about to embark on this project, but when I am done, I have no mortgage, I have no bills, and I have a property tax once a year of about $18. And I really want to explain to you what's going on, because I was talking to Rome about buying vacant lots in the city of Detroit to do the exact same thing. What if you could have a home, have security, have what you needed, and no mortgage? Would that change things in our local communities? Would we come together and start rehabilitating homes for people and check out of the banks? Right? So if we take away their influence and power over us, does that change things? Would we have a chance? Maybe. So that's the story I want to bring next week. So So thank you, Andy, for all the work you're doing on the financial and helping expose what's really going on and bringing those stories out. And then let's sandwich it with what we can actually do as regular folks, what power we actually have. So
Yes, absolutely.
that's it.
Well, thank you, Carrie, again for your due diligence and reporting, and incredibly great facial expressions today. But not that's I'm just going to leave it at that. Everyone else, thank you so much for tuning in today. Had a blast. We're glad you were able to join us, and that's going to be it from us. Please enjoy the rest of your Friday and, in fact, the rest of the weekend. And we will see you here bright and early on Monday morning. Take care.
We bout that, ayy. We in the zone, we out here, yeah. Spitting the facts, how it's supposed to be. Hair of the dog, we keep it in G.